Hi, Pastor Andrew here with another video devotion for us. We've been going through the attributes of God and we've finished those, so we're going to pull off of that now. And we're going to focus our attention for the next several installments of these on the person and work of Jesus. We're going to take the first several of those to talk about His deity, why it is that we as Christians believe that Jesus is God in the flesh. It's perhaps the most scandalous of all the teachings in the Christian church that we worship Jesus as God. That, in addition to the crucifixion of Christ, were in fact the two main reasons that many of the Jews in the first century would not even begin to think that this gospel message was true. They couldn't even begin to imagine that the Jewish Messiah would be crucified, let alone they didn't believe that he would be God. But those two things together, that he would be God, the Messiah, how would it even be possible at all that he would be crucified? So it was a kind of a bridge too far as they were concerned. Muslims, for sure, find that our belief in Jesus as God is idolatrous. There is only one God, and He is Allah, as far as they're concerned. Modern secularists find the belief in the divinity of Jesus to be an example of the intolerance of the Christian faith, that if Jesus was God, that would exclude all other religions, and it would denigrate the religious leaders. They're very fine to have Jesus as a moral teacher, but to be God, that's something else entirely. So we find ourselves perhaps in the kind of the way that C.S. Lewis described this, that Jesus is either a liar, what he said was not true, he's a lunatic, or he is Lord. You really can't negotiate that. And what I want to take these next several videos to lay out for you is that the clear biblical teaching on this is that He is in fact Lord. He is in fact God. He is who He said that He was. So today we'll look at one passage that does describe this for us. We'll take others later on. And it's John chapter 1, verses 1 and following. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through Him, and without Him was not anything made that was made. In Him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. What John is doing here is he is calling our minds, the reader of this gospel, immediately back to the book of Genesis chapter 1, which begins in the same way, in the beginning. And there in Genesis chapter 1, it goes on to describe the creation event, how God brought all things into existence. And the description of that is that God did that by means of His Word. He said, "Let there be light," and there was light, etc., etc. So when John, at least one of the reasons John uses the language "in the beginning was the Word" here, and on down, he's going to become quite clear who he is referencing. In verse 14 he says, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us." He's using this as an identifier for Jesus Himself, that this Word that was in the beginning with God was the means by which God created all things. All things came into being through Him. And so Jesus was the mechanism, you might say, through which God created everything. And then he picks up on this theme in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 5, where he talks about the fact that the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. It calls our minds all the way back to where Genesis 1 speaks of, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. And the Spirit of God hovered over this, and God then spoke and said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light." And so he's trying to capture all of this imagery of creation, this thing that God alone does, and he is weaving it into the story of Jesus and who He is, what his nature is. He is the Creator God. That's what John is trying to say. And to make his point just abundantly clear, it's very clear he's saying that creation happened through Him. But for instance, the Jehovah's Witnesses or the Mormons might say that, yeah, God used Jesus to create, but Jesus was created by God. He was the first of God's creation. That is a ancient heresy in the church known as Arianism. And they would become famous for saying that there was a time when Jesus was not. It's fundamentally an unchristian claim, and I want you to see that it's a fundamentally it's fundamentally opposed to what John is saying here. Because John says in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So, although that language is complicated for us, it's pregnant with meaning. He is saying, by putting these phrases together, that the Word, Jesus, that He is both a separate person from the Father, that's the with part of this, but yet at the same time, He is God. This is one of the places that our doctrine of the Trinity develops. And so Jesus is both with God and at the same time is God. He is very strange in this respect. He is an emanation of divinity from the Trinity. And so we are not coming to Jesus as some moral teacher or some spiritual guru. We are coming to Him as God in the flesh. We'll continue to tackle this in the days to come. But for now, I would encourage you to just take John chapter 1 and read verses 1 through 18 tonight as a devotional practice for yourself. I think you'll find it just illuminating and encouraging to your heart, instructive as to who Jesus really is and why He is worthy of our worship, not just our admiration. And we'll be returning back to this chapter later on in installments as we talk about Jesus's humanity, because He was not merely, or we can't use the word merely there, He was not only divine, He was also human. So I hope you have a good night. God bless.